Welcome back to Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks again for joining us. Our guest is Anthony Portantino, member of the California State Assembly. Your community, the San Gabriel Valley, was really significantly damaged by a wind incident, let's call it, November 30th, December 1st. Talk to us about what you saw on the ground in those days.
Well, it was devastating. The foothill communities, were rocked.
Right.
As I said, we were winded, but we can't be knocked down.
Well, it's amazing. You look at Pasadena, they had over 1,250 trees go down. Arcadia, over 570. Pasadena had to remove over 18,000 tons of tree and green debris.
And all of that at a significant cost. If you look at Sierra Madre, I think this crystallized it for a lot of folks. They have a $4 million general fund budget, and they had $7 million worth of damage. I mean, almost twice their budget.
Arcadia, $3 million in cleanup efforts.
Right.
And that begs the question, can the state help? And I understand that you were instrumental in trying to get state aid for the foothill communities.
Right. Well, first of all, I wrote a letter to the governor asking him to declare a state of emergency, but not satisfied with just doing a letter, I called his office and invited his team to come take a tour of the devastation. And I was pleased that the acting secretary of the California Emergency Management, Mr. Dayton, came down and did tour all day. He toured almost every single affected city and really got a firsthand view of the devastation. And then the very next day, we got the disaster declaration from Governor Brown.
But does the state have the same disaster ability as FEMA, for example, in terms of cleanup?
Well, you can't get the federal without getting the state, so it all works in concert. So it was an important step for the state to do, and I think Secretary Dayton, seeing the devastation firsthand, understood how devastating this was.
Shift
but there's
gears,
also okay.
Now I want to shift gears slightly and talk about another element of the disaster, and that deals with power.
Right.
One of my colleagues here at Time Warner Cable didn't have power for a week. It caused him tremendous consternation. He wound up eating something he shouldn't have, got sick. So that becomes a very significant issue, especially depending on where you live in terms of who owns your utility.
And I think there's a role for the state to play. Certainly we saw some power companies being preventative, putting people in the field, working with the weather reports, bracing for the disaster. We saw others that didn't. We had a lack of communication where people were told, you're going to get your power back on Tuesday. They check out of the motel only to find out that it didn't come on until Thursday.
Right.
There are legitimate questions about the preparedness, about the equipment being available, about people positioned in the field, and about information. So what I have done, I did a little research and I found out that the investor-owned utilities don't report their management plans to the local agencies. So I've introduced legislation, or about to introduce legislation, that would require, starting 3 months from the governor's signature, all the investor-owned utilities to report to the counties within their jurisdiction their disaster preparedness plans, and then have the counties invite the cities to participate. There's 58 counties. I don't think having 58 presentations for all of the investor-owned utilities is an onerous thing. It's a good step.
Well, what would your Republican colleagues say? I mean, they are very much concerned about overregulation.
Well, I think many of them had constituents who lost power. This isn't a partisan issue. This is how do we best prepare, and asking the agencies to have a little bit of public input, I think, is a good step. The other thing is the PUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, is the agency that regulates the utilities. I'm also asking them to set standards for disaster preparedness and participate in these presentations. We need to be prepared.
Do you feel confident that municipal-owned utilities are doing all they can? For example, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
Well, I think what we saw is that there's definitely a need for greater coordination, and I think the cities that the municipals sit in need to do their job and make sure that the municipals present their plan. So everybody needs a little sunshine, a little oversight, and a little shot in the arm to make it all happen.
Stay tuned. He is Anthony Portantino, member of the California State Assembly. I'm Brad Pomerance. Back to HLN.